If you like this video, please consider supporting me on Patreon. For just $1 a month, your name can appear at the beginning of this and many other upcoming videos.
I'd say this office needs a bit of redecorating. Potted plants scream desperation. Phyllis, no!
Wow, this episode literally ended with murder. One thing that I really don't like about the School of Friendship is how after all the ham-fisting we did with it in Season 8, it just became irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. It ended up feeling like a pointless addition to the show because they didn't bother to do anything meaningful with it. And throughout Season 9, it's hardly been brought up at all. Just an idea that sounded cool but wasn't executed properly. And now we have an episode focused on it called A Horseshoe-In, where Starlight tries to find a vice head mare to help her when Twilight takes over the throne. It sounds simple enough until Trixie gets involved, thinking she'll get the position no problem. Unfortunately, she's not exactly well equipped to deal with the responsibilities, leaving Starlight in quite a pickle. I suppose if the episode did something right with the school, it's that they're acknowledging that it was a stupid idea to just make the main 6 full-time teachers. With Twilight leaving and Starlight looking for new assistants at the school, it feels like they're making an effort to correct a past mistake. Because the main 6 shouldn't be there. They already have their own lives, occupations, and responsibilities to attend to. And aside from that, they didn't even have any academic skills. Twilight just made them teachers out of nepotism. In comparison, Starlight is actually making some pretty smart decisions. She actually sets up interviews and puts the teachers through trials to evaluate their qualifications. It's a very proactive move that Twilight should have done from the beginning. Aside from that, Starlight has a pretty adorable personality. Her time with Phyllis is enjoyably silly, almost like she's taking after her dad, but in a less overbearing way. She also uses it as a coping mechanism when discussing what to do with Trixie, which seems like a decent way to vent out her feelings. And she was actually being fair by not being biased towards Trixie, noting her mistakes and not interfering with the other candidates' chances of winning. The other candidates also get some pretty good spotlight moments, except for Spoiled Rich, who totally got served before the end of the first act. They each have some upbeat personalities that make them fun to be around and even act as a positive influence on the students. Octavia is enthusiastic and prone to acting silly, which is a nice touch from just being a straight man to Vinyl Scratch. Dr. Hoves is exuberant and quirky, but also wise and supportive. They really feel like they would be good additions to the school, like if they were a music instructor or a science teacher. And Big Mac, while he doesn't play a big role in the story, actually has a pretty clever moment. He doesn't get the job, but he comes to a mutual agreement with Starlight while making a decision to voluntarily back away from it. He knew it wasn't something he was comfortable with, since something like going into detail at a conference isn't something he's familiar with, being the way he usually is. Unlike Octavia and Dr. Hoves, Big Mac's exit from the story didn't feel sudden, and it was done in an amicable way that fits his character. He knew he wasn't right for the position and didn't want to risk being a burden to Starlight if he stayed in the race. And it also has a nice little message to it. The lesson Big Mac teaches here is that it's okay to step down or back away from something if you don't feel comfortable with it. It's an interesting contrast to the lesson that you can quit no matter what, as it has a way of showing that it's not always true. If something isn't benefiting you, and especially not others, you shouldn't feel like you're forced to keep doing it. It's a really nice lesson that doesn't come up often in shows like this. And I think it was a really good one to teach, even if it wasn't the focus of the episode. Another thing I like about the episode is that the way it centers around supporting and minor characters is pretty clever. The ones the episode focuses on are either relatively minor or not in an overall major role, so writing for them feels like a test of creativity since they're not writing for heavily established ones like the main 6. And it works so well because the episode finds a balance between main and supporting characters in the story. Between the time spent on Starlight trying to overlook the teachers, trying to keep things under control with Trixie, and the teachers themselves getting enough spotlight to portray some character, it's nice to see that none of them were oversaturated or underutilized. But for Trixie, she kinda comes across as more annoying than usual, and not in a good way. She's portrayed as excessively oblivious and unable to understand the most straightforward sentences being told to her. She doesn't listen to anything Starlight tells her and doesn't seem to be taking this job seriously, which is strange because in a matter of principle, she was actually a pretty competent teacher. She seemed responsible and knew what she was doing, so I don't know why she's suddenly like this. At one point, she claims good teamwork with Starlight when she literally didn't do anything. I really don't remember Trixie being this oblivious even when she was a rival in the earlier seasons. The only thing I feel like she did right was standing up for Gallus at the parent conference. The way she goes off Gruff and chews him off is absolutely savage, but it's also really sweet and commendable that she was looking out for Gallus. When you really look at this moment, it expands on how little his home actually cares about him. We got a glimpse of it in Hearthwarming Eve, and now we're seeing more of it being shown here. Gruff even comments how he's only there because he's obligated to do so. He doesn't really seem to care about Gallus very much. It's something that would hit pretty hard for some people, and seeing Trix sticking up for him knowing this is actually a pretty poignant scene. But then there's things like how obviously rushed the resolution and ending are. The way Octavia and Dr. Hooves leave the story is completely out of nowhere, and there was really no reason for it except to rush the solution. It's way too convenient that they decided last minute they didn't want the job anymore when they were doing really good and showing a fond interest in it throughout the episode. They were very suitable for it, but all of a sudden they just leave and it feels like a waste. They don't even get a scene like Big Mac, it's just briefly mentioned that they quit. It's a huge cop-out when the entire story was about Starlight finding help at the school, then finds 2 qualified candidates, but then they suddenly drop out and she just hands the position over to Sunburst. Making Sunburst the vice head pony wasn't even built up or foreshadowed. He just comes out of nowhere and is given the job without having to prove anything. It's one of the most badly rushed endings in the show because of just how arbitrarily the problem is solved. There's no proper build-up to it, and it throws away key characters with no rhyme or reason. Lastly, I feel like it was a problem that Starlight was just stringing Trixie along despite knowing that she wasn't qualified for the job. I get that she wanted it to work out because she was excited about working with a friend, but it just felt irresponsible. Why didn't Starlight just tell her the truth from the start? It makes the story drag in some places because it's really predictable how their bid is gonna go. Starlight should have just told Trixie from the beginning that she's not cut for the job. It's clear they were teaching a lesson about how a job is about what it needs from you and not what you enjoy doing, but this was probably not the best way to do it. So in the end, this episode had some pretty good qualities, but also some pretty bad drawbacks. The way the episode makes use of its cast is really good, but the pacing is off, and the conflict involving Trixie and Starlight feels really dragged out. It was a good showcase for many of the characters, but had a formulaic conflict with a really rushed resolution. I guess this episode can be taken for what it's worth, but I'm hoping we'll get something more consistent next time. So until then, take care of yourselves and stay awesome. This is Map, signing out.